So, first of all, this building that we're in is now called the Theresa Towers, but when it was built, it was called the Hotel Theresa. So I know we have some historians in the room and others who spend a lot of time in New York, so what do people know about the Hotel Theresa, this building? Anything? Yes?
It was a great meeting place for a lot of great revolutionaries, so like Fidel Castro stayed here, Malcolm X stayed here,
right.
They met and organized here.
That's right, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Fidel Castro. The building, until the building right across the street, Adam St. Powell building was built, was the tallest building in Harlem. And it was called the Waldorf Astoria of Harlem. The Waldorf Astoria, as many of you know, is another famous hotel in the city, but until very recently, even my lifetime, African Americans were not really welcome in other parts of town. And so when dignitaries or famous people, either who were of African descent or were of color or in solidarity with them, would come and stay at this hotel. And so it became known, as you were saying, as a meeting place for revolutionaries. So just a list of some of the people who have walked these halls in this building. Louis Armstrong, Sugar Ray Robinson, Lena Horne, Josephine Baker, Dorothy Dandridge, Duke Ellington, Muhammad Ali, Dina Washington, Ray Charles, Little Richard, Jimi Hendrix stayed or lived in this hotel. Fidel Castro rented out a whole floor in 1960 when he came. And as you were saying, it was also a meeting place for Malcolm X and the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And it is considered, one of the central buildings in the history of Harlem. And we are literally in the center of Harlem, which for many of us is the center of black life in the North in America. The Harlem Renaissance and other things. So we are situated in a historical place in this building, but we're also situated in a historical place in Harlem. And what Harlem has meant as a metaphor for many people who left the South, like my family did, after slavery and came north, it represented dreams, it represented freedom, it represented a new life. If you read the works of Zora Neale Hurston or Langston Hughes, it talks about what Harlem represented. It represented a dream. So we're in a place that's connotative of movement and connotative of change and also connotative of rebirth and rebuilding. And that's significant because not only is this the home of IUME, which I'll talk about in a second, this is a campus of Teachers College. And so Teachers College is technically in Harlem. If you look at census tract, it'll say Harlem starts at either 96 or 110. And so, but Morningside Heights is not necessarily Harlem. But Teachers College is in Harlem because we're in Harlem. And this is the Edmund Gordon campus of Teachers College, Columbia. How many of you is it your first time in the building? Okay. So that's something we're going to change. That's why the Colloquium is here. Because this is a campus of our college. And as a director of IUME, I see myself as not only director of an institute, but a curator of this campus. And I want to make it a vibrant part of college life at Teachers College. Okay. Teachers College future is tied to Harlem's future, not only geographically, but ideologically, conceptually. So we can no longer continue to just exist in Morningside Heights, looking at Harlem. We need to be in Harlem. And so that's the institute. So a little bit about IUME before I introduce Benji and Brian on it for a second. I want to introduce IUME and talk a little bit about what we're up to and who some of the people in the room are. The Institute for Urban and Minority Education was started in 1973 by Dr. Edmund Gordon, who was at that time a faculty member at Teachers College and continues to be an emeritus faculty at the age of 90, still going strong. He started IUME for a number of very important reasons. In the late 60s, he was a key part of collecting data for what was the Head Start legislation that really looked at how social and cultural contexts were impacting learning and achievement. Prior to that time, most explanations for failures in learning and achievement were ascribed to some kind of deficit in the population itself. And so he became one of the first that was actually looking at what are the social contexts that are creating the conditions for failure. And also wanted to push past that, and what are the social and cultural contexts that can be responsible for success? So I consider him one of the architects of what we now call multiculturalism or culturally relevant or social theory. All these terms we have now that many of you are studying didn't even exist at the time that this institute was created. It was meant to be a reservoir for knowledge of what worked in education for people that were from historically disadvantaged groups. And so they started what became known as the clearinghouse for research on urban education, and at the time the term disadvantaged and minority was used in the title of the institute, but basically people who had been historically left out of the dominant narrative. But the research showed that if you change the conditions, you change outcomes, which meant that you could not continue to blame the victims. And that was a huge moment, and we stand on the shoulders of those giants in the work that we do as a field. And so it's my honor to be the current director of this institute. And we continue to do those things and focus on supplementary education, but a huge new focus for the institute is how can we radically reconsider life in schools? Not just these conditions that surround life in schools, but life in schools, teaching, learning, how we think about pedagogy, how we think about curriculum, how students are treated, who has voice, right? How we even do research in these places. And we also say the only way that you can really do research in schools is to be in schools with 2 feet on the ground in schools. That's new research. Looking at what works, documenting powerful pedagogy, understanding how you make relationships with students that are different, that empower them. What is a culturally relevant model of engaging parents in the community? How do we collect research that can be then used to advocate for change in schools? And so we're already, beginning to work in a number of schools. We're recruiting a couple of dozen teachers in the Community School District 5 in Harlem for our Literacy Teachers Initiative. We're working with the middle school at Wadley here in Harlem. We're working as part of the Newark Global Village zone at Central High School in Newark. We're going to be housing a collaborative project with Beyond the Bricks, recruiting African American males to be filmmakers, and through telling the story of their own life through new media, kind of acquiring a different kind of self-concept. We are planning to host an urban debate summer camp for children and that are involved in the New York Urban Debate League and their teachers, thinking about how to connect this powerful form of rhetorical agency to academic literacy. And I could go on and on with the projects, but IUME has a bright future. We have a bright past, but we only look to the past to inspire the future. And hopefully, many of you in this room will see IUME as a part of what you do too, because IUME is not an institute as much as it is a collective of people, and we'd love to have you involved. So before I introduce